My name is Fukagai. Thank you very much. And as for today's seminar we are holding, Hayashi-san, so the Kurakawa-sensei, and the Tajima-san, these three people are coordinated. So I am also involved behind the scene. But so anyhow, I was asked to do something. So I would like to contribute in this way. In our discussion in the morning, and Professor Paul David's the really historical explanation, and also what's really happening, and from Murayama-san and Joseph and the Kurata-san, Ichiko-san, and so what really captures the database, and what kind of libraries functions are really utilized. So by taking all of these in mind, let me give you some brief as a brief presentation. And first of all, actually, my point here is the opening, and in the academic field is really happening, taking place, ongoing process. Actually, in many years ago, actually the knowledge were really open. But even in the the age of the Socrates, the Pythagoras, the brothers, were really hiding the knowledge as a secret very much. But actually, that was a time when enjoying the intellectual also the knowledge really starts. And by the end of the medieval era, and those the written information or the intellectual are really copied manually with a manual transcript, and so only the trained the professionals transcribe, and those with the knowledge, so a form of the book was established. Then the technological revolution advancement really was done, and the mass production of those copies become available. So then actually the concept of the ownership of the knowledge, who owns the the right of the knowledge or the intellectual, and how should it be the made available to the public. So while the new issues arose, and based on that, the legal the regulations and the system, commercial systems established. And in 20th century, the academic world is really much more diversified than before, and detailed classification is becoming adapted. In the early time of the modern era, and so actually the academic is really about the writing. So at that time, there was no specific the academic and the scientific the publication specifically for the few the domain of the business of the academia. But these days, actually, those the publications are really classified and separated into the different field, different domain. Then actually those are the academics, the journal publications, that becomes a very important role. And moving into the 20th century, now the the digital the contents are becoming now. In network environments, we have these discussions. So printing technologies, the dramatic the development was really the epoch-making the point. And from that, electronics, the journal became available. Then articles, not only the articles already the put onto the electronics of the journal before, but also including the others institutional the contents, the repositories that became available. So here are the open openization has become a sort of topic, and the repository is established, and research institutions, so that each of them so that really tried to have their own repository one by one. So institutional the repository, so the repositories were established. Then later the issue of the sort of open science and really raised. And so open science, the word open science, so that really became sort of popular in the year 2000 or so. Then Professor Arikawa, based on the sort of Arikawa-san's background, actually, so that without so that having the sort of knowledge of the sort of open science, so that once the sort of faculties are sort of assigned to the person responsible for the library staff was sort of having a hard time to explain about that. Well, this is a slide the sort of David used in his presentation. Thank you. And in the sort of National sort of Library sort of Association, I used this slide. So in 2016, in the General Assembly of the sort of Association of National University Libraries, so Vision 2020 was actually approved. And so I was sort of part of a supporting member of that, and I prepared this slide. And this slide says, so traditional libraries are, so the use the sort of academic the sort of outcome already sort of established and sort of stored, and so those are sort of provided and supported the sort of research, and then the new sort of wisdom is outcome is produced. So this is the cycle we were using, and this. In 20th century, so for researchers at least, for researchers, actually working researchers today, the academic, so actually no one so really so that believes these days the so the 1980s style of the sort of distribution was the main. But after 1990, so the reading the sort of electronic journal through the electronic sort of media is really becoming the sort of mainstream. So in the faculties, those who are really sort of training the sort of younger researchers and the juniors are sort of in this generation. It used to be my generation. Actually, the sort of Xerox photocopying the sort of journal was the main way. But in electronic journals era, so contribution and sort of having the sort of even good evidence, collecting the sort of evidence and sort of doing the sort of assessment through these things. Actually, we are now sort of having the issues of what to do with the sort of open science through those sort of activities in the sort of academic field. So open science has some the sort of continuity element with information revolution, but at the same time, beside the sort of continuity, actually the sort of you do the research because your research sort of might contribute to the changes. And actually, sort of once you open so that your own the sort of output, then sometimes you might start sort of feeling the sort of really anxious. So actually, in academic field, so actually the things are sort of partly the sort of really sort of continuing, but or it's really sort of changing, and the revolutionary thing is taking place, or not, and so that these phenomena are so that everyone's interested in, and the information transmission, and so that in other aspects, actually the changes we experienced. Radical changes we experienced in the 20th century. So how communication is done, how information is spreading. So this drastic change we experienced in the 20th century, actually that took place in the 17th century as well. So actually, one of the key is to consider those things. In the middle of the 20th century, when the World War II became really intense and become almost ending, scientists scientists were really brought into the sort of the national scheme. So what to do with the global war? And sometimes some people called it the science revolution, and they actually they looked back the scientific revolution in the 17th century. Scientific revolution, this word did not really exist in the 17th century. In the middle of the 20th century, so the other word, the scientific revolution emerged. But by looking back to the 17th century, so the researchers try to consider what to do in the 20th century. So that there are, of course, a small number of people, but those small number of people really try to do that. Based on that, so today's information revolution and open science, in consideration of these. So actually, so this is a sort of the boomerang thing. So that we are looking back this about 20 years ago, what was happening 20 years ago, and then we are thinking about today. So actually, the half of the David explanation was about this kind of a strategy. So our boomerang, so the flying back to the middle of the 20th century. So by knowing that, then flying another boomerang again to the 17th century. So then actually that we are going to fly another boomerang to the more the near the recent past. So then that we might also consider about the future, what really happens in future. So the boomerang be flying back, coming back to us from the future by referring the what happened in the future. So actually, what are going to be the intellectual or the wisdom in terms of the age of the information revolution and open science. So this is not really about think about the open science, the knowledge, but the important framework is how we need to consider the ideal way of the existence of the the knowledge. So open science in 18th century, and there was a book which has open science in a phrase, but in just one word in the 1,000 words, but the meaning should be very different. Open science scholarship actually existed in the past, but so this should also be the very different the meaning.
It was in the mid-1980s, actually, in open science and closed science. Actually, this is in that pair. We found them. Then open science with the quotation and economics and open science. These papers actually were written back in 1990s. In other words, so we have invited the professor and the person who actually started talking about what is an open science. So what an honor to have him and to be a part of this seminar. Moving on to the 19th century, of course, printing technologies in advance, and also the urbanization is well underway. The time is running out, so I don't know what to do. Actually, I have another extra slide I wanted to originally present. Well, then I'm the chair, and so I think I can show these pieces of information here and there. So allow me to move into the panel discussion with the panelists. But again, allow me to show this last slide before we move on to the panel discussion. Thank you, Professor Fukagai. So let us now move on to the panel discussion. So the panelists, would you please come forward? Please come forward. So now the Fukagai-sensei, would you please start the panel discussion with your moderatorship, please? Allow me. I'm going to show the slides one by one. I am actually studying a student of the history of the philosophy and also social science. Professor Kurata, of course, now you are fully leveraging the latest technologies, but that's not the case on my side. Actually, for the several years, actually, I was doing the cut and paste and introducing, in writing my paper thesis. And that said, again, I belong to the classical generation. And the human's knowledge versus the animals in the living natural world, and which is superior. And many people say that human beings are superior, but you're wrong, because in many areas actually the animals and some of the superior. But again, one of the characteristics of human beings is we can actually make a recourse, and actually we can think about by making reference to the memories of other people. So quite funny, quite unique. So now we are engaged in what we call the scientific. And actually curiosity is going to be generated, and that curiosity is going to result in what we call science. When we're impressed, actually, when you are pissed off, probably there will be no science coming up to the surface. When you are impressed with something awesome, and probably no science coming up. But when you are curious about some things, get out of curiosity, we sooner or later we may end up with what we call science. Well, you like to try it out. You like to have the experiments, and also you like to make a good reference to the other people, whether or not there are other people who have thought about the same things, or you may wish to have the good engagement in the form of dialogues. Well, Professor David, I think you'll be receiving lots of heavy questions, and so if I may, I'd like to actually ask the first questions to going to other people, if you don't mind. So kind of wonder in a sense, and curiosity. We are about actually tons of data, and those tons of data may help us, because if there's too much data, too many data, sometimes that's not going to be helpful in addressing the curiosities. Maybe Murayama Sensei, please, or the Joseph-san, please. Any one of you, please. Whether data is going to help us to address these issues of curiosity. Allow me to speak in Japanese, because the question I have just received is way complex. What to say? I think here we are looking at the cycle of the knowledge creation in the science field, whether or not that is going to be considered as something new or not. Data is not something special. This is the very first point. Data coming from the observations, and data coming out of the experiments. Well, the just experimental outcome. Well, just those outcomes are being accumulated. So we ended up with those information assets. For example, Kelvin, for example, again canals, again on the tidal waves, and just observing the waves and in the canal. Actually, he came up with which his original idea on the side of the fluid dynamics. So I think he was observing these things, and through the vision, and his brain definitely got involved in there. Nowadays we have sensors to make these observations, and where now we can discover the wondrous curiosity. Well, in the modern science, there seems to be separation between the science and the wonder, quote unquote. For example, the sky is blue. Again, looking at the red out of the spectrum of the sun being absorbed, resulting in red is one case. So, for example, in the pictures of the skies, actually, the light spectrum definitely going to be quite important. But again, in the space, and looking at the spectrum of the spectrum absorption in the space, actually it is going to be totally different things. And how to put it, and again, within the very small domains, and again, a very narrowly defined the discipline. Actually, there will be lots of the in-depth questions, and actually now the science is expected to actually find answers within such a very narrow space. I wonder, quote unquote, is one thing, but now we are forced to actually make a good observation. So getting away from the wonders that we may observe and out of our natural space. Of course, this is on the science is evolving, and of course we are. We are raising this question that we need to be supported in the form of the funding, and then coming from the public side and from the government. But again, I think science is now going through this new phase, and how this new science can make its contributions to the betterment of the entire human beings going forward. If I'm not wrong, probably we're moving into the new mode, what I call new mode, quote unquote. I think there is a potential of that. Again, with that point in mind, now we're trying to we need to actually collect tons of data and information so that we can be helped. Thank you for that contributions. Well, the wonder going to becoming the curiosity and becoming the science. Well, looking at the olden days, for example, the astrology or the shaman and witches, they played a very important role in convincing the people at large. So the wonder actually is going to become a science. Just like in those days, the witches and those shamans, so there could be certain similarities. Thank you again your feedback, Murayama-san. Actually, the leading edge and scientists, of course, well, whether or not our kids are wishing to become scientists and someday in the future, and this piece of data are going to help them to start this journey. Sorry, I'm not getting it, the translator, but. Well, maybe we may be digressing a little bit, but the science. What is science? I think it depends upon the collection of the evidence and the logic. So I think human beings and I think are going to actually come and find this the conclusions out of that. In the ancient days, actually, it was actually religion and something else, and who are actually the unifying, controlling factor. For example, the compass. But science, I think, is going to be the logical baseline. With that, we may be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. So I think the science in this regard, is we can expect a lot vis-a-vis the science with this point in mind. So I think we have to make sure that we have to spend enough time, we have to spend enough the financial resources so that we can actually nurture and develop the science. What is your point earlier? Well, just forget about it. Well, thank you for that. Anyone else?
I think I wanted to add the dimension of time to the discussion. The question is, we would like to have a lot of data about the natural world, as well as a lot of data which is generated by experimentation. In the case of the natural world, the question is, do we need it now? Because the premise of people who study the natural world is that they have studied replicating phenomena which is not going to go away, or if it is going to go away, then there's a question of what priority do we assign to capturing observations of it. So this raises some interesting questions about whether the temporal immediacy of having access to observations of the natural world is qualified by forecasts about what things will disrupt or impede our ability to observe when we are ready to make some sense out of the observations. In other words, you could record now for future use if you thought that in the future, not due to the natural process, but due to another natural process, volcanic eruptions, which will make it impossible to make the same kind of readings of the stratosphere and the troposphere and so forth, and it will produce other disruptions in our ability there. So there would be a reason to take the data now if you thought that you were going to be able to use it in an effective way within the time frame between, let's say, so that when the next expected eruption of a major volcano is predicted, then you would say, well, I think by the time that that's going to happen, we'd be able to use more intense observations of certain phenomena which will not become available. So similarly, there are species which are going to go extinct from whose habits and behaviors, and also some part of their physical attributes will be lost to us. And yet we know that some of the genes from which they derived are in the gene pool and will interact with others. So we would like to have observations on those before they disappear. Okay. So I think I confess I'm an economist. I always think about resource allocation. We have scarcity of ability to observe. The question is, what is the prioritization of observing? One set of criteria is, will this be around for us to observe when we're ready to do something with it? Okay, or can we expect it will be around? It will persist into the future, and so forth. So it is a very complicated process to ask, sort of what data do we need to take now? Okay, and this is true of social phenomena as well. So I think it's useful to think about this in that sense.
I remember some economists or social scientists discussed about that the future market externality, which is beyond the time, and maybe we need to find a similar thing now.
Since I have the microphone for a moment, could I just put a footnote in to Professor Fukagai, a reference to an early use of the phrase open scholarship.
Open science scholarship.
No, open. I thought you said you had it was open
science scholarship.
Oh no, yes. But the way you have to read it is properly in English, in England. Okay, it is a modification of the term open scholarship. And open scholarship is a scholarship to which anyone can apply. You don't have to come from the county of Essex. You don't have to be the child of a Protestant priest or any of those things. Now, and then the modification is that this is an open scholarship in science. It is not. Yes. Okay. It is in a scientific field. It's an open. So people say it's a science scholarship and it's an open scholarship. Okay. So I think that is the way it should be understood.
Thank you very much. I got kind of homework.
As someone who has not grown up in England, but have spent a lot of time there, it is a continual discovery of my ignorance of what the phrase actually means now and what it meant in the past. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Then Hayashi-san gave some questions. Hayashi-san gave some questions to the afternoon speakers. And in Japan, we have many libraries. And at Keio University also has Gutenberg printed Bibles. So very precious treasury type of the books. And university such as Keio can share that treasure with the general publics, but some of the such institutions do not really share their treasured assets. So even though we create a catalog in Japanese, we cannot really share that internationally. So I have a question, Ms. Heather, that Japanese researcher, when they write thesis in English, then that can be shared by English reader. But when it is written in Japanese or non-English, then how much can it be known in the U.S.? The people who are involved in these journals, what is the evaluation of these Japanese-made thesis?
I think it's hard to. You're right. When the language is not a native English language in the U.S. and internationally, sometimes the science, the scholarship doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. But I think about one of the applications of open, and one of the potential benefits of open research is that you can translate these materials. Like, there's no restriction against translating any open material. So at least in theory, if dissertations and theses that are originally created in Japanese are made available under true open access conditions, they have a better chance of reaching a wider audience, and that includes in a translated form into English. That's a service that could be provided. A lot of times, I think when we promote open access, we get a reputation of, this is, you're just people who want something for free. Well, that's actually a potentially very valuable service that someone could provide over a layer of important research that would otherwise not reach the kind of audience that it potentially deserves.
Thank you.
Murata sensei or Ichiko-san, would you like to add something? Well, I was once told that senior researchers can write in Japanese, and they read English, but they can write in English. But some of the researchers in younger generation read Japanese, but do not really write in Japanese, so that it is very difficult to really publish the thesis in Japanese unless you are really in senior researcher. When it comes to languages, we are living in a competition, and it is often said in university, when we make it as you open, then you can translate. So it's eye-opening. We mentioned about the copyrights, but when the thesis is on the open sources, then you can translate. That's very important for us.
Can I before you do, one of the ironies, because we have historians here, that we hear about translation is that the one discipline that is particularly keen on translations being a derivative work that shouldn't be allowed under open access tends to be historians. So I'm really curious to hear your reaction to whether this is a good thing or not. I'm trying to learn.
Translations are a derivative work because translation, actually, good translation involves interpretation to express the thought, the nuance requires an interpretive translation, and there's a large literature on the problem of translation of poetry. It's impossible to translate poetry. Okay, you can read the poet and you can try to convey the rhythm, the timbre, the sentiment, but this is a creative act, and nobody who has ever tried to translate a poem or even a very short poem, a haiku, will come away disagreeing with this. So I think that the problem of open Creative Commons license, which is intended to restrict people taking your work and reproducing it in a derivative form, which takes, you create something by leaving out some part of it. You can manipulate the text and create a different thing. So on the slide set that I showed before, the logo there was a Creative Commons attribution only, no commercial use, no derivatives. Okay, because otherwise people just take what you have and your name, and they can make you appear to be saying anything. But this problem arises, so maybe we need to go back to Creative Commons and say, can you not make a distinction between a translation and another kind of derivative, where, as I always impose when my work is, people ask to translate it, I said, yes, but you must send me the translation, and I will get a native speaker of the language, and I will take the time and the expense of having them read it, knowing what the original text says. And if they come back and say, no, they have expressed this the wrong way, and so forth and so on, then we go back to the journal and say, yes, okay, you can do it, but it must read this way. I don't give you permission to publish what your translator has made. Yeah. So it's possible for the author to control this. Whether it can be automated is something which about which I have my doubts. Okay, but it's an interesting and important point that you raised about translation and its status in the law. Okay.
So interpretation and the translation, when we start talking about these, it will take time. But even at the Kento Shi, which is the special ambassador or envoy sent to mainland China, and also they use the Chinese characters and try to interpret that into Japanese context. And I think that that's also relevant to what we have just discussed. So I'm showing one screen, Gutenberg Bible to electronic communications. It is unilateral communications. So you read it, then you have to plan for the future, and you get the outcome for as the earliest time.
Well, so interest is, of course, obviously very important, and based on the sort of interest, people, researchers decide what to research. But the major change we are having here is in the sort of open science. So the communication way to make the sort of open discussion available in open science manner. Actually, the writing letters manually, people are not really writing letter manually. But so in academic scenes, so actually the casual style is not really good. So then, how people can communicate to each other. So now we have a thesis or the report. So with the cooperation or collaboration of the people who actually never met physically face to face. So actually, so even if the research was published by a certain established organization, so today it's not really quite sure that those studies are really reliable one, and the data is really the applicable universally. So judgment, so the criteria to judge so that you understand the sort of knowledge, intellectual, or don't understand the intellectual knowledge are becoming really vague. So what is knowledge, and what is the sort of philosophy? Actually, we might at least be able to say the sort of open science and to be open is sort of better than not too open. But comparing to the sort of traditional conventional academic, now the question is the continuous or the sort of revolutionary changes. Now the computers or the AI, artificial intelligence, are sort of beating the professional Go or shogi chess players. So let's put the matter aside, whether those AI has its own the characteristics as a like a human, but let's put that aside. But actually, those AIs are being trained and to bring some conclusion. Well, actually, but AI has its own sponsor, and some specific companies are paying money for AI research. So, AI, is it really okay that some specific companies and with the funding can actually own? Or if the AIs can be regarded as the intellectual community, once AI becomes really grown up, self-standing, maybe the parents they cannot really control in future. Or should we really regard the AI as a should we really believe that the AI really belong to human, because the AI, artificial intelligence, is first of all based on the human brain. So from now on, that we have about 30 minutes or so from now on. So now I would like to open floor to your questions or comments or insight. My name is Nagasaka JST. So I would like to make some philosophical questions matching with the moderator's tone. So when we look at this open science as a practically working, one of the aspects we see is the reason why science is changing from closed to open is, so this is just because there was a technological evolution which makes the open is now available. Based on that, back in 17th century, if we were having information communication technology or ICT in 17th century, so were we really doing the open science in 17th century? So I would like to ask panelists about your personal opinion. Open science, so is open science means simply to getting closer to the ideal meaning of the science, or with the technological revolution, science itself is changing right now, or we are just moving to the real the meaning of the science, or science is changing or not. So which way do you think it is?
Well, I shall try not to repeat the lengthy comment which your question after my talk elicited from me. I think, first of all, I would disagree with the notion that open science is, in its essential characteristics, being only coming about because of a technological transformation. Open science existed. It was the basis for the internationalization of physics. in world conferences, the golden age of the emergence of new physics, and then the controversies over the relationship between classical physics and quantum dynamics was all played out in the open. Okay, and the people all knew each other, and they argued on paper and so forth. But they argued at conferences, and so the view was it is a collaboration in the pursuit of knowledge of the physical world, and it was open to everyone by across nationalities. It was often people. It was international. It was the internationalization of science. Okay, was one dimension, but the dimension was that it was collaboration, and it was a collaborative search for something which would be, for the moment at least, accepted as an approximation, a working approximation to the truth. Okay, we never get to the truth. There is always more to be understood. But the question is, for the moment, we need to go on with the way we are understanding, the way we capture observation on phenomena, the way we try to understand the mechanism driving it. It's easier in the natural sciences than in other sciences. So I say, no. What is under discussion now is whether open science can be enhanced in its power to deliver good to society at large, and do it in a way which is egalitarian, democratic, and engages the researcher, not the sponsor, not the patron of the researcher, in deciding what is to be done and how to do it.
Well, so the slide with the boomerang picture, that was impressive. My question is related to the previous questions. Actually, flying back to 17th century. So maybe this might flying back to Greek, age of Greek. Then in the age of Greek, it's not really a science, but it's about the philosophy, Aristotle. And in the medieval age, Copernicus. So actually the important thing is the consistency in the logic theory. In the medieval era, so that's the core, and then in the modern era, the experimental thing, the demonstrative things are added. Now people are talking about open science. So instead of the logic, so consistency in data, and the phenomenon understood by the data and its consistency. I think this would be the mainly important thing. So in 17th century, if the much more data is available in the 17th century, I think the natural science like today should have existed. What I really wanted to know is if it was really philosophy, discipline should be philosophy. So today, in the world today, discipline are really separated too much, diversified and separated too much. So everyone is with disciplines. A Japanese academic system is based on the disciplines. Disciplinary way of thinking has been really the fixed, and that in the age of the open science and the open data, so maybe this can be really broken down with that. Actually, the point that we are reaching in the end would be really the philosophy, we think. So going back to the Greek age of Greek, so not really disciplinary the category, but this culture so the culture that the researchers can really consider from the philosophical, the larger point of view is very important. Actually, we really need to change the education first of all. So actually, the including the music, so actually the important. So education and the education system itself should be really changed. So without doing these things, the open science, in real terms, cannot be really realized. Well, my points are really the flying this and here and there, but actually the way of thinking towards the education that needs to be really changed from the beginning. Otherwise, the real open the science and the education changes will not be really taking place. That was my point. Well, thank you very much. And the point you raised, actually, is it possible that the new way of the academic science can be emerging or not? Science from 17th to 20th centuries. So the science which was established there is not really continuing as it is for good. So the medias are changing. Authorship and the dissemination could be changing. Publication could be changing. But actually, the how to lead to conclusion, how to solve puzzles, actually, this point will not really change in future, we think. What really necessary here is, I don't know if we can really get the answer with the physics for everything, but usually physics were really based on the mathematics and the theory based. So without mathematics and the physics could not be really solved. But now when people start talking, okay, if we have rich data, then we can solve the issues, solve the points. But it actually doesn't work. When we really wanted to use the data, actually, it is really necessary to check the physical theories established in the past. Otherwise, your report or the thesis and just talking about the what's going on. So, in terms of the scientific understanding, the discussion about the data here is. So actually, the data portion, data percentage, becomes much higher. So data is becoming the larger percentage. However, but the utilization of the data has not been really good enough. So we should use data more. On the other hand, the theory and the mathematics and equations, not without mathematics, but when we after actually the having and the using the data, it is really possible that we really go back to the use of the mathematics and the theory, and the science as a way to establish the logics and for our future. Actually, we need to have the both approach. Actually, in that sense, we are not really expecting the mode change. So I think the point is how communication, part of the communication, are going to change our time. And in terms of the difference between Watanabe-san and Murayama-san, actually, I am somewhere in between. I cannot really say I'm on which one side. Open science is not really the borderless science. So Murayama-san is right in that sense. And the data, this is not really about that you say that you understand the things with the collected data, but actually the collected data will have the wider opportunity in the wider academic area for the checking. And if everyone cannot really work out with the rich data, Actually, those who are using the data efficiently and can really prove themselves as they are using the government budget efficiently. So in the define the discipline, I think that's the way it is.
If I may, I'd like to further expand on this point. Well, we have the existing evaluation system, and this evaluation system is not going to be the best fit. Okay, who comes in first? And we have referees. I think, with open science and coming up and evolving as time goes on, probably we have to. It's time for us to revisit whether or not current evaluation system or judgment is going to be the best. What time is it now? It's 4:33, so we have less than 20 minutes. So the management of the scientific information. I'm just wondering whether or not you have any questions concerning managing the scientific information. Anyone from the floor? Murayama-san, I think you are deeply involved in data centers and the.
SPARC by Professor Watanabe, who I would like to say that I met Professor Watanabe when I was much younger, and he was a senior person in the Department of Economics for a number of years, where he was much appreciated. So it's a great pleasure. I have seen him only once once after that time, but it's a very great delight to see him and to see his continued creativity and stimulating things he says. So I was stimulated by the question is whether discipline is outdated, whether it is breaking down today, whether this is due to digital technology. I wanted simply to take another angle on it and to think about the role of discipline in equipping people to function within an esoteric field whose concepts are not natural things that you learn as a child and so forth. You have to learn what they mean, what their significance is. So there is an instructional purpose that is essential, and the organization of instruction within disciplinary framework has turned out to be very productive. Well, I could say a lot of people got educated that way, and most of them who were educated in esoteric subjects actually benefited from it, even by having a clear definition of what they wanted to reject. This is important. Now, a methodological change has undermined one aspect of classical physics, which is its dependence upon mathematical formulations and solutions to find out what is the equilibrium toward which the system is tending, and therefore to explain what we would persistently observe. If it was a world of chaos, we wouldn't be able to describe the phenomena as stable in some way and worth trying to explain. The methodology of mathematical solutions became valued, and the formulation of theories which could be solved with the available mathematics became dominant because calculation was not possible. The amount of time to do the calculations to find out whether you could actually write down the whole system and solve it formally. You could conceptually do it. You could do it in a representation, but in order to actually extract it by calculation, that was impossible. So this was the theorist's edge, and the dominance of theory in this field over experimentation, observation. Okay, the theorists were at the top of the pole. Everybody was lower. Eventually, experimental work with astronomy and the things created a second pole. And there were two hierarchies. There were experimental and in physics, and then there were mathematical. But one of these poles was higher than the other pole, the one where the theorists sat. Okay. Now, and what has now happened is the revolution of computers which have made calculations so cheap that you could get an algorithmic solution from something that would be otherwise impossible to calculate, and this created a little revolution. And there'll be some good stories of meetings between people who took over the framework of theory from classical physics into economics, and used many of those kinds of models became kind of paradigmatic in representation of temporal change and so forth. And there was a meeting between physicists and social scientists held in Santa Fe, at the Santa Fe Institute some years ago, in which Professor Kenneth Arrow, the late lamented Kenneth Arrow, gave a presentation of the way economists did something, and Anderson, a physicist, gave a talk about what physicists are doing. And first was Anderson, and then came Arrow. And at the end of Arrow's talk, Anderson said, why are you solving these mathematical problems? We don't have theorems anymore. We don't prove theorems. We calculate everything, okay? So we make representations which are in some sense simulation, to simulate the phenomena, and we can calculate it, and we can adjust that, and so forth. And this is the way that we go forward. Okay, so there is this kind of displacement. Unfortunately, the physicists said, well, that was a good thing because now that we're doing quantum electrodynamics, we are doing it because the person who developed this did it by showing a way that you could organize the calculations much more efficiently without computers first, okay? And then that opened the door to great advances that you could then do the calculations with algorithms which were informed by his methods. Okay, so there is this back and forth transformation where technology plays an important role. And this was the problem with Galileo. He could see the moon and show people that there were spots on it. And skeptics said, how do I know that these spots are just not being produced by the telescope? Okay, because you can't see the moon to verify this, except with the telescope. So if I build a different telescope, will I get the same answer? Yes, and the answer was yes, if you build it properly. It doesn't have to be built by the same person, but follow the recipe for building the telescope for the optics, and you'll see the same thing. And that was the way the controversy was settled with it. I should stop now. It didn't help Galileo deal with the priests.
Okay.
Allow me to speak in Japanese, yes. Yes, I do appreciate what you're saying here. Again, back in the 16th century, 17th century, mathematics, well, as a science, well, actually, mathematics created a value of science, actually created scientific customers, and so utilities and values actually, drove these things, advancement of science. But again, so what right now? Right now, we are having computers, and the utilities of computers, the values of computers. Earlier, Mr. Murayama actually, you should consider those things which cannot be explained physically and should be regarded as the garbage. But how about deep learning? There is a group of people that are telling us that yes, as long as we can find a solution out of the deep learning, that is going to be the value for them. maybe they are talking about totally different science. Again, the mathematics created current modern science, but again, with the deep learning, of course, it is based upon the algorithm. Again, this may create a totally different the science. That was the point I just wanted to get across to you earlier. But again, whether this is true or not, setting that on aside. But again, the fact is that those things are taking place right on the surface, and so these things may be created outside the community of scientists. This is my biggest concern. In other words, smart and soft developers actually are actually going to write an excellent algorithm. Of course, they should have studied scientific things. But again, they're going to make their contributions not in science the discipline, but actually in the business areas, and they're going to make money. So actually, whether you like it or not, the ecosystem is going to be created along the way. There'll be no people, none of them is going to write paper. And they don't need to have a good reputation. They don't need to get scientific reputation. Well, just algorithm provided. And with the algorithm, validation is going to be possible, and the sources are available on the GitHub. But they don't need to receive the scientific reputation. That's the kind of the world being created. If that's the case, then how we should interpret that? How you like to address these things? Would you like to have them coming into the scientific side, or are you say you're fine, just on your own? So I like to receive how you feel about these things.
Then let me start. I think what I'm proposing is a bit different from the scholarly commons people, but I think we have to include that. Even though it is academic, separated from the idea of citizen science, the researchers in the private sector should be involved in the research which have the ultimate goal, and the people who can share the same methodology in one project. And if there are some commons that you call it, and they get together and study for that, then that is going to be the ecosystem of the scholarly communication. That's my ideal.
Is that it? Okay. Yes. Machine learning is the big thing. Training an algorithm to be able to make decisions, matching faces, doing lots of other, taking in lots of pixels, and then being able to discriminate between two different things. Now, this is part of the idea that human beings can learn by pattern recognition if their data or observations can be displayed in a way so that they may observe certain recurrent spatial patterns. Okay. Now, this one is first we start with the question of whether humans can learn to be able to extract interesting and stable epiphenomena from the display of patterns by just taking an awful lot of data and manipulating it, so transforming it until you find something that's very striking. Okay. Now, the issue here is human learning. Okay. Can humans have perception limitations, but they also have pattern recognition, which people learn at a very early stage and And a lot of decisions that we make without even thinking about them involve pattern recognition, things we see. Blink responses, objects that are flying past induce you to duck your head without processing what it is and so forth. A lot of things are encoded, okay, in the old brain. Now, we are therefore able to perceive things of a certain kind, which are, if you like, historically dependent. So the question is whether we can work with machines which will display things for us, and whether we can perceive the things that we might be interested in because they have a distinct signature, a pattern. Okay, so this is a limitation of machines, not of machines. It's a limitation of people to work with machines. Then comes the other side, which is machine learning. Can machines work with people? Okay, is machine learning something really different than what simulation is? Essentially, you need to train the machine on how to recognize these faces and what to do in a various decision. So you're going to train it the way you would like it to behave. So now you are replicating yourself into the machine, okay? And so all of your limitations are now conveyed to make the machine, in some respects, as smart and as dumb as you are, because you can't train it unless you use your human intelligence to get it to behave, quote, properly. So that AI isn't solving those problems. They will persist.
Thank you. My name is Hanayama. Professor David, I would like to extend and build on what you have just said. Human beings observe the natural phenomena by 5 different senses. And by doing so, human acquired a tool, and AI is one of the tools that the human being acquired. And with 5 senses, we can sense many things, but some of the things are elusive. We cannot really sense it. And data is one of them. Some speciality or the things that human cannot capture can be maybe captured by AI. So reversely saying, human used to make a hypothesis and conducted experiment, but AI may be able to create a hypothesis by themselves. So that's why we have AI scientists. And they are planning to make an AI to conduct the routine experiment. Then what type of wisdom that the human have to provide? So we have to make a progress. So going back to the origin, whether it is interesting or it is rather curious, that is sort of an intuitive way of human beings. But that is interesting. But you have to be careful because everything is done by AI, then we are going to lose the raison d'etre of human being itself. So use of AI is also another training during the education. And my concern right now is that it's relevant to my generation. We started using computer later on in our life. But the children are digital native. So missing part for them is that maybe their intuition may not work. Like they feel the breeze and they feel something, or some kind of curiosity invoked by the intuition in the reality. We have to provide a special way for human or our children to feel that natural phenomena in the reality. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. It's almost like a virtual phenomena. So Haruyama-san already summarized everything. In the middle of 20th century, we could study ant society to give a morale for human beings. But now AI even can give us some clues about the moral society of human society. I think, therefore, it is usable. So including that, as you mentioned, that now education started using the devices, and the studying based on the digital devices, the students may not see the book at all. So what's going to be the role of the libraries? So at the beginning of the 20th century, people started using a bicycle and started riding a car. And this type of evolution could be comparable to what we are going through right now. So it was a very interesting discussion at the panel discussion. It is almost like a Buddhism, very enigmatic question and answer session, but thank you very much.